In May 1810 in Buenos Aires, the Premier Hunter was set up to govern the Spanish colony. After Ferdinand VII of Spain had been deposed by the French, they were at this point still loyal to the king. But a small council of regency in Spain still tried to assert its authority over the colonies. This meant all the territories in the vice, royalty of the Rio de la Plata, of which Buenos Aires was the capital, had to pick sides. Either the Council of Regency or the Premier a Hunter. Most of Monday Argentina sided with the Premier a Hunter, but Monday Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay did not. For remaining loyal, Montevideo was made the new capital of the Rio de la Plata, and its governor Delio was made viceroy. But there was some resistance, as José de Vasconcelos Artigas rebelled and supported the Primera Junta. However, to counter this new threat, the alias requested aid from the Portuguese in Brazil, and their arrival in the region forced the junta in Buenos Aires to sign a truce. This truce, however, angered Artigas, who broke off relations with Buenos Aires and fled the territory. The junta in Buenos Aires, however, was able to take Montevideo in 1814 after a 2-year-long siege, effectively ending Spanish control in the Rio de la Plata. They declared independence from Spain in 1816, forming the United Provinces, but Artigas had managed to raise an army and capture Montevideo. To form the Liga Federal, he appealed to representatives from across the country to join him, dividing the country in two. Meanwhile, the King of Portugal, John VI, had fled Europe during the Napoleonic Wars and set up court in Rio, but he remained there after the wars were over. The British were largely left to govern over Portugal, while Brazil had been made an equal partner. In the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil and the Algarves no longer just a colony, Brazil looked to expand, and many regions at that time were disputed. But Banda Oriental had been fought over in the late 18th century. Plus, the port of Montevideo was crucial in the region and could challenge Buenos Aires. Also, the Portuguese feared the spread of republicanism, and so too did many high-ranking Spanish officials, who even supported the idea of a Portuguese invasion. And the centralist government of the United Provinces was still contending with the Federalists, so they too offered no resistance to the Portuguese plans. So the Portuguese invaded Banda Oriental in 1816, using its descent into anarchy as a cause for war. They invaded with over 10,000 men, many of which were veterans of the Napoleonic Wars. And 6,000 of these men marched straight onto Montevideo, while the remainder were to be transported by ship. Artigas only had a couple thousand men at his disposal, but planned to stop the invasion through guerrilla warfare. Despite some successful ambushes, the Portuguese just had too large an army, and were able to occupy Montevideo in January 1817. They, however, had some difficulties in defeating the guerrilla forces, so a 3-year-long conflict tore the region apart, and around 5% of the population were killed. As the war dragged on, some guerrillas began to defect for leniency, and after losing successive battles, they lost over 800 men at Tacuarembó in January 1820. Meanwhile, in the United Provinces, they had adopted a new centralist constitution in 1819, and still looking to unite the nations. They finally fought the Federalists themselves in February 1820, but the United Provinces could not muster together a large enough army, as many refused to fight in a civil war, and even some mutinied in order to remain in Upper Peru. So the League of Federal emerged victorious, and Rondo, the supreme director of the United Provinces, resigned and the country was left leaderless. However, the governors of Santa Fe and Entre Rios, the generals who had defeated the United Provinces, pushed the rulers in Buenos Aires to sign a treaty, the Treaty of Pilarín. They agreed that the country would be united, but as a federal republic, the Liga Federal therefore collapsed, and Artigas finally had to admit defeat and flee to Paraguay. The fighting, therefore, subsided, and Portugal was free to annex the region. But in 1822, Brazil would achieve their independence from Portugal, and they couldn't keep hold of the region for long. Just 5 years after Artigas had fled, a group of revolutionaries sailed to modern-day Uruguay, declared their independence from Brazil, and loyalty to the United Provinces. These 33 Orientals then set up their own provisional government in Florida, and had elections. But this would lead to the Cisplatin War between Brazil and the United Provinces, and this would result in the creation of a new nation known as Uruguay.